As part of recreating our GraphQL project to work using a database, we also will be using SQLize. So there are multiple packages available for Node.js developers when it comes to working with MySQL, and those include the actual official MySQL package, which is called MySQL. Then there's an enhanced version of it, which is called MySQL 2. Then there's Next, and I'm pretty sure there are some others as well. And the one that we're going to be using, which is SQLize, is actually an ORM, which is short for Object Relational Mapping. So that means that we will be able to create models that we represent a user and a car, do associations between those models in a very simple way. So for example, we will not be required to actually specify what is a foreign ID, what's a foreign key, and then map them together, because SQLize will do that automatically for us based on its associations and based on the models that we can define. So we will need to install this. As you can see, this not only works with MySQL, but also works with SQLite and some other databases. So we're going to connect to a database, and then we'll be able to create a model. So this is how you create a model. You can specify the actual fields with data types that you want. So those are going to have the appropriate column types in the database table as well. And then we're going to insert some sample data, and then we will see how to recreate our resolvers to make sure that they use the data coming from the database. Okay, so let's go back to the application code here. And the first thing that we will take a look at is, of course, models. So at the moment, this file index.js has a static list of data. And of course, we will be using dynamic data from the database. So let me make some more space here. And actually, let's close this for now. So let's remove everything from index.js here. And I'm going to create some additional files under models. I will create one called database.js. I'm also going to create one called car.js and user.js. So these will be the models that we're going to be working with. So we'll have a model definition for the car, for the user. We will have a database connection set up in database, and then in index.js we will sort of stitch them or merge them together. So let's take a look at database.js first, and before we write code, we need to make sure that we install two packages. So we need to install SQLize, and because we'll be using the MySQL dialect, we also will install MySQL 2. This is the enhanced version of the MySQL npm package, which SQLize depends on. So after the installation, we can start writing some code here. So we're going to bring in SQLize. And we're going to create a new instance of it. So this is going to set up the database connection. So what are the things that we need to specify here? We need to specify the name of the database. And even if we don't have the database, this is automatically going to create it for us. You can call it whatever else you want. I'm just calling mine GraphQL. And then you need to specify the username and the password. So this is the username and the password to connect to your database. Okay, I'm going to type in my password later, but please make sure that you type in your password. And then we need to tell SQLize what database we're going to be talking to. So we need to specify the dialect, which in our case is MySQL. Then there has been some changes with how SQLize works, and it's going to throw you some errors even if you just use the default code that they give you on their website in the documentation. And that's a known bug, so they have a bug open on GitHub. So that's why we're setting operators aliases to false to get rid of the warning messages. And we're also going to specify a global setting here, which is timestamps to false. So I'm going to tell you what this does. So every time when you create a model with SQLize, you specify the fields or the columns for that model. And by default, if you don't have these timestamps set to false, Sequelize is going to add a created at and updated at columns to every table that you create for every model. And I don't want that at the moment, so I'm just going to set this timestamps to be false at a global level, so that when we create tables from the models, they will not have these additional columns added. And then let's do module.exports and then export Sequelize so that we can use this in other parts of our application. Okay, so you can actually save this file and we don't need to come back to this ever again. Okay, so let's take a look at our user model first. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, we need to create a user. Okay, so this is going to be Sequelize.define, and then we will define a model called user, and we will specify what fields we want. So these fields in here are going to be actual columns in the database table that will have the name user. So the only thing that we have is the name, which should have a type, and then Sequelize has this convenience class called data types that exposes all the data types that you can use. So we want to use a string data type for the name. And there are additional fields that we could specify here, like how the ID should be generated and other things. If you're interested, I do recommend that you read the Sequelize documentation. Okay, so the question here is, where does data types and where does Sequelize come from? Well, we're going to create a user function here where we'll pass in Sequelize and the data types, and we're going to make this user declaration part of that and return this user, and we will export this user. So we could have written it this way as well, by the way. So this is how JavaScript works. So this is exactly the same, or even say function and not use the arrow function here. This is the same, but I just like to have a separate variable there. So we're exporting this user. Okay, so far so good. So let's go and do the same for car. So for car, we want to create a separate table as well. This is because we want to make sure that we have a table with some columns for the car as well. So let's do the same that we did for the user. So let's do Sequelize and then data types, and then let's do const car Sequelize define, and then we define our car table, and this will have more columns, right? So this has a make column which has a type of string, and then it has a model column which has a type of string as well, and then last but not least it has a color which should have a type and is data types.string. Okay, and then we're going to return car and do module.exports equals to car. Okay, so let's see index.js now. So in index.js, we will get Sequelize from the database file that we created, because we'll be using some Sequelize related things in here. So what do we want to do in index.js? We want to bring in both of the models that we created, and somehow we will want to associate these two models. So associating these models requires us to do a few steps. We need to do some work in index.js, and then we need to go back to each model and specify the relationship between those models. So first of all, if we think about it, what is the relationship between a user and a car? So user.associate is the method that we are looking for, that accepts what is called models, and models is going to be an array of all the other models that we have. So in this case, it's going to be just car. So we're telling this user model to associate itself with something. And you can look this up in the SQLize documentation, but user, because user is now a model that we specified right here, it has a method called hasMany, and we can say models.car. So this is going to say that associate the user model with the car model, and this is saying, and this is a classic one-to-many relationship, right? So one user can have many cars, and this is represented in SQLize by using this hasMany method. Now, interestingly enough, we will add another option here called onDelete and cascade. So onDelete cascade is actually going to create delete statements in SQL that say delete on cascade, which is basically saying that if we delete a parent entity, delete all the child entities as well. So it's a cascading delete. So meaning if we delete a user, we will also automatically delete all the cars belonging to that user. So this is a very convenient way to achieve this multi-delete. So we have this in place. So let's remove that. Okay, so now we have associated the user with the car, but now we need to do this the other way around as well, because we need to associate the car with the user. So we say car.associate models, and then what we will have here is going to be something very simple, because a car can now belong to a user, and there is actually a method called belongs to in the SQLize package, and then we're just going to say models.user. So this is now saying that a car belongs to a user, and this is now saying that a user can have many cars. So now that we've done those associations, we can actually use another convenience method in SQLize called import, and we can import the models that we have created by using this import method. So we have user and car imported in here, and now we're going to create this models object, and we'll have the user to be equal with the user model and the car to be equal to the car model. Okay, so we can now do module.export and then export these models. Now there's one final thing that we will need to do. We actually need to run the associations, and I've seen a very good code sample on GitHub that allows us to do that. So you can do object.keys of models, and then for each key inside those objects, if the term associate is in models array indexed by the key, then we can say models key.associate models. Okay, so this is going to go through our models and associate them together. Right, so this is now done. So let's make sure that all these files are saved. And what we're going to do next is create a file, which is going to be a brand new file called load_dummy_data.js. And in this file, we're going to add some dummy data and then insert that into the database. The two things that we will need in this file are the SQLize and the models that we created. And what I'm going to do is create a function called createData. And this is going to be a function, and then we'll do a few things in here. And at the very end, I'm going to call SQLize.sync, and let's say force true for now, which is going to force the creation or recreation of the tables. Then so SQLize is also a promise-based library, as you can see, and then call createData in here. So what we want to do here is connect to the database, and that's done using sync, and then createData will then insert the data into the data tables. And what is creating the actual data tables is going to be the SQLize.sync method. So every time when we call sync, it's going to go through the models that we have and create those tables. with force true, it will drop those tables and recreate those tables. You don't actually need this, but we can probably just do sync here. So what should create data, this function, do here? Well, it should insert some data. How can we insert data? Well, we can use models dot and then user and then dot create. So the user model exposes a create method, and here we can specify the actual user name. And because we've done the association between the user and the car, we can very simply say cars, and that's an array of objects, and then specify the details of the car that belongs to this particular user. And this is useful because, as you can see, I don't need to specify anything special here, right? Even though the user model that we created for Sequelize does not have a car's property or anything related to car, because of the association, we can create a user and we can include the cars in here. So this is a very powerful thing to do in Sequelize. And we of course need to tell the model or this user creation function that it should be using the car model. So we do that by saying include and then models.car. Okay, so this is how it should be done. But this is going to insert a single user with a single car. But of course we have some more test data, so we should probably try to insert more than one user. So how can we do that? So create returns a promise, and I mentioned just now that Sequelize is actually a promise-based npm package, so it uses promises. And because it uses promises, we could use the latest addition to the JavaScript language, which is the async await keywords. So we could make this function an asynchronous function, and we could just say await this creation of this user, and we could then type in await models.user.create and then specify another user, and then later on another await statement with another user. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy some code that I've written to insert multiple users. Here it is. So we are inserting another user called Susan and then yet another user that now has 2 cars. And what we will need to do in this sync function as well is to make sure that this is an asynchronous function, and then do some error handling here and try to run create data, await create data, and we use this await function as well because we have the async keyword in here. And then let's just say process.exit, catch any potential errors, and console.error the error. So just log out the error to the console. Okay, so we've done quite a lot of work. Let's see if this works. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say node load dummy data. And we have an error here, so let's see what this error is. Unrecognized data type for field model. So probably let's go back to our model for the user. Okay, so that seems to be fine. So it's data types string. That looks fine. What about car? Ah, there it is. Line number 7. That should be type. So let's save that. And let's try to run this again. Okay, so now we got some messages back. Let me make this bigger so we can walk them through. So we have create table if not exists users, has an ID and a name, primary key ID, and then create table if not exists car that has a make, a model, and a color. And notice this, it has a user ID, which is a primary key ID with a foreign key user ID that references user.id. So this is the model association in action. And then we have insert into users, we insert that user, then we say insert into cars, and then we insert that car with the ID as well. Okay, so this is going to work perfectly. So what I'm going to do is run a quick test using my SQL Workbench. So first of all, let's do select star from users. And notice we have users inserted. I've probably done some tests before, so that's why I have a duplicate here, but you should have ID 1, 2, and 3 in here. And let's do select star from cars. Okay, so we have these cars with the representative user IDs available as well. Perfect. So far so good. So now what we have is a functionality that allows us to use this data in the database for our GraphQL endpoints. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to probably fix my table so that I get ID 1, 2, and 3 before we start the next video. But in the next video, we're now going to take a look at the resolvers and see how they can actually consume this data coming from the database.